What we want to do here today is to share with you some observations and thoughts and perspectives from Horizon's end about what it is we're looking at and what we can do. And also then to, of course, hear from you and to talk about whatever is on your minds, questions you may have, and hopefully we will be able to have some dialogue about that. Just to give you a sense of what it is that we're going to cover, I'm going to provide a little bit of context, kind of a bit of an overview. And then I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Francisco, our head of grants and programs, and he will be talking about more of what we're seeing here in the Bay Area and some of the things that we've learned from doing a lot of listening to people over the recent weeks and months. Then it'll go over to Henry, who's going to share some very interesting insights about the Donor Advised Fund program and how it supports our community. And then we'll have a conversation about what it is that we can all do together. As far as if you have questions, please feel free to either raise your hand or you can put them into the chat. If you have a question that you really want to have answered, like right now, go ahead and raise your hand, and this does not have to run without interruption. But if it doesn't need to be answered right away, then maybe hold on to it towards the end. And we look forward to having dialogue. We're doing it in this format rather than a kind of stiffer Zoom format, because we want to have the opportunity to have all of us talk among one another. And so it's not just one way. So with that, I wanted to invite all of you, just before we get started, to share a little bit of your thinking. And Henry, could you put that slide up, please? Yeah, so if you can just fill in whatever comes to mind. There's no right or wrong here.
And if the wording is a bit small on my screen, it looks a little bit small, I can read the question in case it's hard for anybody to see, because it is a bit smaller than I expected. So our poll question is, what is the biggest challenge facing the LGBTQ community at this moment? I'd love it if everyone answered this question. I think this will help us give an interesting set to what we're about to talk about.
Okay. Henry, can you remind me of where I can see responses?
I think I have to end the poll and then I'll be able to.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I think by now people have had enough time. And again, it's not we're not grading you, so if you haven't had a chance to, that's fine.
So let me end the poll and get some answers. So we had 10 of the 18 participate, so that's a good turnout. Are you able to see the answers now?
No.
It looks like.
No,
Let me share my screen. It looks like maybe I need to share my screen.
Yeah, why don't you just go ahead and do that? Give them a quick look. We've got a lot to cover here.
I could see my answers, but I couldn't see anything else.
Right, are you able to do that, Rhonda? It's a bit small.
Yeah, you're gonna have to make it bigger. I don't think I know I can't read it. Funding cuts, uh, perhaps funding threats I see, Supreme Court, trans people. There's a little word cloud up there, more attacks on the trans community being erased. There are a lot of these things that connect to one another being disappeared. Disappearance of the trans community, the repression. I see some themes here. Henry, thank you. We go back to the regular screen. So obviously we have a lot of things on our mind and a lot of things, that we are facing. And some of the ones that you all mentioned are among the most prominent of those. I want to just share a moment of personal perspective if I can. So I've been around, as I know some of you have, for kind of a while. And nearly 40 years ago was around the time that I came out. And that was shortly before the Supreme Court decision in Bowers versus Hardwick. And I remember when that decision came down, as some of you may well remember too, and I was driving in a car. I was living in St. Louis at the time. I had this giant, ancient, beat up Buick Regal, which I bought for like, $600 or something like that. And I was driving along one of the streets in St. Louis and I heard this news on the radio. I remember I was so angry. I remember I literally was pounding the ceiling, of the car because I was so angry about it. And of course, that was a time when, the epidemic was, in one of its, worst periods. And there were so many other things going on. And I mentioned that only to say that right now is the most worried I have been since around that time. It is what we are facing is very, very real. And I suspect some of you who've been around may feel the same way. And there are a couple of things about what we're seeing now. One of them simply is the breadth of the attacks. It seems as though almost anything that is LGBTQ either has been, is being, or could be attacked. Whether that's in policy, whether that's in law, whether that's a program, whether that's a funding matter. It seems like almost everything is fair game. And of course, they're attacking all these things at the same time, we all know is one of their core tactics. And the second thing that really stands out to me is what I would just call, to use a somewhat legal term, but the sheer animus that is behind a lot of what is happening. Right? What other than deep animus could explain a decision to take down a hotline to keep LGBTQ youth from taking their own lives as they did? What else but animus can explain having to go out of your way when kicking trans people out of the military to call them essentially inherently dishonorable? And that kind of spirit is what also we know is driving them. They want to do to us exactly what they managed to succeed in the DOPS decision eventually. And they're not going to stop until they get there. So, well, why is this happening? Well, we all know that there's been a general rightward tilt, in the country. That's not something I'm going to belabor. I think we're all aware of it. But I think another thing that's very important is that it's a reaction to our success. Because just since that time that I talked about in St. Louis, we had a great deal of success. A lot of things have happened. And history is full of examples of times when the pendulum swings in a more progressive direction, and then it comes back. And over time, hopefully it swings more toward the progressive than it does when it comes back. And we look over a several decade period, we helped that pendulum move quite a long way. And we're seeing a significant reaction to that. And their attacks on trans issues, of course, are the most visible. And knowing many of you here, I have a pretty strong sense that you already know this. But even though a lot of what they're doing opportunistically is directed against trans people, we're all on their radars. That is very clear. If you remember the notorious Project 2025, you can look at everything from the State Department stripping all mentions of LGBTQ people from its human rights reports, not just trans people, but all of us. Looking at the Supreme Court and saying, well, yes, it's fine for a parent to keep a child from having any exposure to LGBTQ issues. They didn't say just T. The agenda is broader than that. So we have what could be broadly termed, this political crisis, but we also have simultaneously, and a couple of you picked up on it in what you mentioned, we have a fiscal crisis too. We are facing severe reductions in funding for LGBTQ causes. Some of that is ideological and some of it is more fiscal. The ideological part is coming from the federal government. And again, whether it's cuts to the NEA or to the CDC, or support in countries around the world from the government, that's all coming from an ideological perspective. That's not about the money. But at the state and local levels, we are looking at something that is very much about the money. And we could name example after example, but that's having a direct effect on the organizations that are providing the services for our community and advocating for us in every way. And the last thing I'll mention before I hand it over to Francisco is public funding is one of the areas that's very important for LGBTQ or organizations, for the nonprofits. Another area has been foundations and corporations. And when we look at foundations, which can never fill the gap that public funding does, but they have a lot of resources. There's an annual report that comes out from a group called Funders for LGBTQ Issues every single year. And that report, the most recent one, just came out a couple of weeks ago. And what it shows is that there was a decrease of 19% in funding for LGBTQ causes, which is, well, 19%, almost 20% less money than just the year before. As far as I know, there's never been such a sharp decline. What that's going to look like going forward, we can't be sure. But this is an indication that we are not going to get saved by foundations and corporations either, which of course brings it back to the conversation that we're having today. And to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing on a local level, here in the Bay Area specifically, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Francisco.
Good evening, everyone. It's really good to be in community with all of you tonight. So let me start by posing at least two questions that I get asked quite a bit these days. One is, where's the need the greatest in the LGBT community right now? And usually when somebody asks me that question, I say, well, it's not about right now, it's, what is the need now, the next year, the next 3 years, and then what is it that we need to do to rebuild? So it's this moment, but beyond that. And the next question is usually, what is Horizons doing or planning to do to meet the need? I'll try to address the first one a little more in depth, and then the second one, I'll skim, but I'm pretty sure we'll have more time for conversations around that if people are interested. So to echo what Roger shared earlier, but through the Bay Area lens, so even here in a region known for progress and pride, our LGBT communities facing such a storm. Right now, some of the hardest hit members of our community we know are trans brothers and sisters, as well as our undocumented individuals. But the reality is systemic and is community-wide. So let's take a moment just to ground ourselves and let's think a little bit about where is the region that we live in, that we play in, that we love, that is so special to us. The San Francisco Bay Area, now it has one of the highest per capita of for the LGBTQ population in this country. That means that it's not an accident that in the 9 counties of the Bay Area, there's 10 LGBTQ centers. And Horizons, our own LGBTQ nonprofit directory, lists over 100 LGBTQ organizations and programs. And that's just amazing. It's everything from health and wellness to legal aid, housing, arts and cultures, sports and recreation, advocacy, you name it. It's just such a robust directory of nonprofits. And we know some of the big, large nonprofits, right? The multi-million-dollar ones, but the majority, they're the small grassroots community-run groups, often operating on a shoestring, volunteer power, and some of them have no paid staff. And I know, just like me, a lot of you have volunteered over the years in those nonprofits, either as board members or just volunteering your time, and a lot of us continue to do so. So we know that the ecosystem. We visit the ecosystem, where we take part in that ecosystem, and we benefit of that from that LGBTQ nonprofit ecosystem. It also is a reflection of what we as an LGBT community of the San Francisco Bay Area have been able to build over 45 years of care, action, and community. But we, I mean, not only us as individual donors, but also in partnership with Horizons, in partnership as youth DAF holders. One person cannot do it, one organization cannot do it. It's been a community effort to build such a rich LGBTQ nonprofit ecosystem. It is diverse, and unfortunately, it is more vulnerable than what we've seen ever. To echo what Roger has mentioned. In the background of all this is this region that we live in that has immense wealth, as well as an immense inequality that continues to grow. And you heard this from Horizons over and over again, but LGBTQ people, especially those at the intersection of race, immigration status, gender identity, or age, are feeling the squeeze even more when it comes to inequality, wealth inequality. And that reflects in across our LGBTQ organizations who are facing some amazing pressures. What we've heard from all of our nonprofits is demand is surging. Especially among trans folks, youth, elders, refugees, asylum seekers, undocumented community members are seeking more and more services from our nonprofits, not only from residents from the San Francisco Bay Area, but across the state and from out of state. It is viewed, the Bay Area, as a sanctuary place, and a lot of folks either moving here or trying to seek services online. So it's creating some downstream pressure on our nonprofits. As Roger mentioned, government funding is shrinking, and it's shrinking fast. It's at every level. It's at federal, state, county, city. If you look at Oakland budget, San Francisco's budget, San Jose's budget, and unfortunately, I wish I can say this started in 2025, but we saw this coming. For example, last year, California voters approved a measure that began to move money from prevention services, like those for queer youth, into housing funds. What we started to see toward the end of last year was a lot of these essential programs being cut or disappearing. And now it's even worse because we're seeing even deeper cuts. Roger mentioned around philanthropy, and we know mainstream philanthropy has flatlined. If not, we see the growth that we have seen for years begin to reverse. And unfortunately, we also see some signs of beginning pullback in terms of LGBTQ funding, whether it's for political reasons or other people have other reasons, but we're beginning to see the pullback in philanthropy. And of course, all of us are living in this time where political attacks are intensifying. We're not immune, not even in the Bay Area. In fact, what we see in parts of the Bay Area and certain parts of our counties, an increase in anti-LGBTQ sentiments as well as actions, and we see that on the rise. And of course, economic stress, whether it's inflation, stagnation, wages, cost of living, are putting pressure on our nonprofits as well as the people that they serve. So, this is not just a tough year, right? This is systemic, it's coordinated, it's happening across the board. So that was pretty dark. But let me see if I can turn this a little bit, that there is hope. First of all, we've been through this before, and we know how to respond. Meaning through this, that our community has been under attack. over and over again, and we've always responded. Long before there were public dollars or the big name foundation showed up, it was our community that built the foundations of our movement. It is reflected in that directory of nonprofits. It is reflected in their progress. It was community funded. It was funded by individuals, by DAFs, by Horizons, by a lot of folks, because we had no choice. We created those clinics, those crisis centers, those legal aid, those cultural spaces. With what we had, we created those over the years. And we gave because it was easy, but we gave because not because it was easy, but because we felt it was urgent. And one thing I have to say about the LGBT community, we gave out of love, out of necessity, and out of radical hope. And we didn't wait for somebody else to step in, because in conversation with a lot of nonprofits and a lot of our elders in our community, we knew nobody was going to come and save us, so we needed to do it for ourselves. And I think this moment is asking for that again. Because at the end of the day, our progress is reflected in the power of the LGBTQ giving. So it's not about how much, but it's about how deeply we show up for each other. And this is echoed with our nonprofits, how deeply we're going to show up for them, because they're showing up for us every day. We're going to dust off those playbooks to meet this moment with innovation, pride, but also I would say we have to show up with bold generosity that has defined our community. And that's what tonight is about. It's about activating the power that all of us have. So earlier this year, Horizons hosted regional town halls across the 9 Bay Area counties. We wanted to listen, we wanted to learn, we wanted to gather in community. It was powerful having those regional town halls this spring. And what we heard was powerful. Actually, it was a chorus of voices calling for connection, for courage, and for compassion. Several themes that came across loud and clear, including a call that it was time to come together and connect as a community across the cities, across counties, across different parts of our community. That connection was not a luxury, it was a strategy. That kept on coming up again, that how is it that we're going to connect in a strategic way? And that leadership is born from communities, born from our LGBTQ nonprofits, right? That the leaders, how this movement is going to lead itself, is going to come from the ground up. And that this moment is more than just political. One theme that kept on coming up, that this moment, it is cultural, it is spiritual. It calls us to show up fully with our values, our voices, and yes, our resources. So at Horizons, we've always taken a look at an approach of the ecosystem approach to LGBTQ philanthropy, because we're a community foundation. We do not fund in silos. We fund across systems. We fund in health and wellness, advocacy and legal rights, arts and culture, community building, because everything's interconnected, and that's how we approach our funding. We will continue to do that. There's the part of what I said that we're responding to. We will continue to do that, but at a larger scale, because it is what this moment is calling for, especially through our community issues. Some of you know this is our flagship program for the San Francisco Bay Area. So we'll be making some announcements in the near future about the scale and the size of that. Because we're committed to funding the whole ecosystem, because that's what we need to do. We need to fund the whole community, the whole human being, all of us together. And we're going to continue to show up in a trust-based approach with unrestricted physical support. One thing that we know that we've heard from our organizations, that look, you cannot fund us and say, okay, you need to do this for the next 6 months, because in 3 months, we may be doing something radically different because the moment calls for. So they need the flexibility in terms of general operating support. I get to approve all the DAFs that you guys fund. I approve DAFs once a week. And I see that a lot of your giving is general operating support, is unrestricted, and that's what's needed at this time. Also, as a foundation, we are not shying away, while other folks may be shying away from funding what may put a political target on our backs. So, a month ago, we announced $1 million commitment over 3 years to build the capacity of trans people of color-led organizations, because that's what this moment is calling for, and we're not going to shy away. So the question is, what is it that you can do as a DAF holder in this moment? And I know Henry's going to announce more about this, but I would say that you can help power the LGBTQ nonprofit ecosystem. Yes, like we're going to continue to do so at Horizons. You can resource resiliency and resistance through your DAF. You can be part of building of what is next. And I'm just gonna close off and then turn over to Henry with this. And this is something that that is being through line through our communication work now. That that we can weather the storm, and that we wanna, in weathering the storm, we also want to reimagine the future, not just survive with today. Because at the end of the day, LGBTQ people, we're more than what we survive. We have always been what we built together. So I'll turn it over to Henry.
Francisco. And again, thank you to all of you for taking the time to be with us this evening. It's a really important conversation. So I want to just take a couple of minutes and just give you some programmatic highlights around the Donor Advised Fund program. I think you all kind of know your individual parts with your DAFs, but I want to just give us a little bit of an overview of what you all have done collectively recently, so you can get a sense of, kind of where we are. Give me 1 second to share my screen. All right. Give me 1 second. Make sure I have, there we go. All right. Is everyone able to see this? Hopefully you're all able to see the screen. So this slide talks about kind of the overall program and the total holdings that are within the Donor Advised Fund program across all DAFs, and the total amount that's being awarded annually from our fund. So as you can see, I took a look at 3 years worth of data. And what you'll see on the top row here is these are the DAF holdings. So these are the dollars that sit within the DAF programs, between all of your DAFs cumulatively. So and I'm looking at this through fiscal year just because of the time of year we had. I wanted to give you a complete picture by year. So in fiscal year 23, we had $25.3 million in assets in the DAF program. Of that, about $5.5 million was donated, and you'll see how the DAF assets have grown over time. So you'll see between FY24 and FY25 there was a pretty significant jump in the value of the funds. So we went from 26 million to 35 million. And that's a combination of factors, the most important being that folks in that period of time added more money into their donor advised fund accounts. So that was a great influx of cash that people had and put it into their funds. Also, the stock market, had a bit of an uptick at this point in time. So there was, nearly a $10 million kind of growth within a year within the program for the holdings. On the second line, you'll see the total grants that have been awarded. So you'll see that between 2023 and 2024, we had a bit of a decrease. I think, people were a little tapped out from COVID. This is kind of the right after the main parts of the pandemic. So I think people were kind of holding back a little bit. But then you'll see a significant $1 million+ jump between 2024 and 2025. So, while we've had, some not great news, sometimes it's hard to see light and positive things. One big positive is, over $1 million more was contributed to organizations. And this is all organizations, LGBT and non-LGBT organizations. So we had a really great increase in this past year of $6.6 million coming out from the funds. And then I wanted to break down, I want to do one quick poll for you all. If I can do this easily somehow. Give me 1 second. Apologize, I have too many screens here. There we go. Unable to, I'm stuck somehow trying to bring up this poll. So what I will do is I will just verbally ask you this question, and you can put your answers in the chat. So of this $6.6 million that was granted this past year, what percentage do you think went to the LGBT community? And you can just add your answers to the chat and we won't
Harry, I think I can launch it for you.
Okay, thank you. There we go. So folks can take a quick second and just give your answers, please. All right, that was very quick. Thank you all. I will end the poll and I will give you the answer. And actually, you all were quite good and actually gave the right answer. So of that $6.6 million, last year, 48% of that went to the LGBTQ community. And so, you know, that's a pretty good increase for the years. You know, in 2023, you'll notice that the so here we go. So the answer was 48%. So that was about $3.2 million. So between July 2022 and June of this year, the LGBTQ plus giving has actually increased. We were at 36% a couple of years ago, and now we're at 48%. So I think that's a wonderful positive trend that we're seeing, which is more money is going to the LGBT community. There was a good period of time there that we were getting a little concerned because the LGBT portion seemed to be shrinking. And you know, more money was going to non-LGBT organizations, but that trend has reversed in the past couple of years. So thanks to all of you for doing that. And then I want to just give you a little bit more information around, you know, where is this money going to the LGBT community? One of the things that we track here at Horizons, you know, beyond whether or not the dollars are going to queer organizations or not, we also track dollars staying within the Bay Area and going outside of the Bay Area. So this slide here will show you in this first graph here, you'll see these are the LGBT grants. So of the total amount of LGBT dollars that went out last year, $2.2 million of that stayed in the Bay Area, which is a really great number to have. And a little under $1 million went outside of the Bay Area to LGBT organizations. On the flip side, we had $2 million going to non-LGBT organizations outside of the Bay Area and $1.5 million going to non-LGBT organizations, but the dollars were staying within the Bay Area. So, you know, currently we're almost at a 50-50 split between LGBT and non-LGBT giving. And, you know, our goal is to continue the trend that we're seeing, which is more LGBT giving, particularly this year and in the coming years, that we can continue to grow that. I think that's going to really help our organizations, as Francisco said, are really suffering at the moment and need funding to continue to operate. One other breakdown of information is just how collectively you all have given to issue areas. So we track a handful of issue areas and you can see from this chart that advocacy and civil rights is about 27% of all dollars that go out of Horizons Foundation's DAF program. And this encapsulates all grants, not just LGBT. And I'm only showing you 1 year worth of data, but if you look at prior years, the breakdown is almost always the same. I think the area that is starting to grow a bit more is our other category. And the other category encapsulates other types of issues such as educational institutions. We've seen quite an increase in funding going to educational institutions, for scholarships, for in supporting LGBT programs. This also encapsulates things like the environment, and that's another area that we've seen a lot of growth in, is folks giving to environmental causes. So the other category is growing, and that just kind of tells us also that as DAF holders, you have lots of varied interests, lots of values that you hold dear to yourself that you're helping to fund. And, a lot of those don't necessarily fall into our official grant making categories, but you're funding lots and lots of programs all over this country. The smallest piece of the pie is community building. And Francisco, in his remarks, talked about the community centers and how we have multiple community centers within our space. And those organizations fall within this community building piece of the pie. So you'll see that that is the smallest portion. So, we aren't funding our community centers kind of at the level I think that we should be. This also includes things like training for our next generation of leaders, organizations that are really working with folks to kind of take the reins going forward. So that's what falls within this community space here. But you'll see that, definitely we have a strong advocacy and civil rights component to your giving. Arts and culture has really been growing, and health and human services has stayed pretty steady. And this incorporates things like food banks, those types of organizations. So, the money that is being granted through your donor advised fund is really, as Francisco said, funding the ecosystem. And our goal is to continue the trend of continuing to fund LGBT organizations at a higher rate. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand it over to Roger, who's going to tell you a little bit more about, kind of the real reason why we're here.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you for that. And again, thanks to all of you. One of the things that I wanted to share, and Francisco alluded to part of this, is that Horizons as an institution, of course, it's important that we respond, with you, our donor advisors, but outside of that, as well. And so just to share a couple of those highlights as we've worked our way through that, just in terms of the grant making part of it. So Francisco shared that we announced this new initiative to focus on trans people of color organizations, which has been in the works for a while, but it turned out to be extraordinarily well timed, given that all that we can see that has been happening, and the targets on some of our most vulnerable groups on their back. And in addition to that, the board has approved an additional $1 million to go out, in our grants, to supplement the money that usually goes out, because there's the level of community need that there is, and so we're also taking money out of other places, and more the general fund, to be able to increase our grant making quite substantially as well. And what we are wanting to put as something of a challenge, of a friendly challenge, to all of our donor advisors, is collectively to make another $1 million in grants, more than were made last year to LGBTQ causes. So if last year the total was something like $3.4 million, if I remember correctly, this would be a challenge to collectively raise that to at least $4.4 million. And the way that we are setting this up is, again, it's a collective effort. Just like everything that has been most successful in our community and in our history has been collective effort. It has been when we're able to join together, whether that's in terms of raising funds, getting on the front lines, whatever the need may be. The way we're putting it together is we're not setting up some fund that we are asking donor advisors to make grants into. And then, Horizons decides, where that money is going to go. Rather, what we are encouraging is for you to give to those things that speak most strongly to you in our movement, in our community. So your funds, they can, if it's, the arts that you care about most, that's great. Queer arts, that is. If it's international issues, that's great. If it's helping to support some of the community centers that are doing so much vital work, and as came up before, that is also great. And so, because we know that all of you have different interests, different things that matter the most to you, things that have touched you in your own life, and that you're most passionate about. And we want you to be able to to just continue to follow what it is that draws you the most, where you see the greatest needs. We are happy to support that in any and every way possible, and including having conversations about what it is that you might have interests in, and then we can get significantly more specific than we can in a setting like this about particular organizations, about different options and possibilities for where you might think about recommending grants. And those are conversations that we hope we can have with as many of you as possible. And we'll be of whatever support and help we can. Our goal, and the goal that we ask you to share, is collectively that $1 million more come from Horizons Donor Advised Funds to our community at this time of such great need. And so we're hoping that you can join us in this, because this is one of those moments when those proverbial chips really, really are down, and it all translates. I know some of you have spent a lot of time on different front lines, or you are right now, is right to the front lines. So the people who need services and programs, and they're not going to be there anymore, or the people who are having their lives completely thrown into disarray because they're no longer have the protections that they used to have. I know that Francisco and our colleague Josh went to meet with a number of organizations out in the community in the recent past, and one of the themes that they heard was that queer youth are in considerably greater need of mental health and psychological support than they were even like a year or so ago, because they're getting so much negative messaging out there in the world, and the list could go on. We know that there are infinite important causes in the world right now, and just right here in the Bay Area, and we're complicated people. I mean, most of us care about a lot of things in the world, and that's wonderful. My husband Royce and I mean, we give a lot of things to LGBTQ causes, but that's not the only thing that we care about, and we know that's true of all of you. This is a time when we are asking you to okay, thank you, Julie. Julie just gave a very pertinent regular example from the Trevor Project, which, as most of you know, I think, supports it's a suicide and mental health hotline for LGBTQ youth, which is, and I actually happened to be at a conference about a month ago or so, and the executive director of the Trevor Project was there, and she shared that the amount of calls that they got, and they have it set up as a electronic thing as well, and digitally, went up 700% after the election. I don't know where it is right now, but that's just another indication of it. That's just like a stunning increase, and that's because that's how people are experiencing things. That's how young people are like, what the heck is going on? What's my place here? Am I going to be okay? Am I going to be safe? And so thank you for sharing that, Julie, as yet another really pertinent example. So I want to pause there, and if well, we have, a few minutes left and all, and I, my colleagues and I know if you have, any thoughts or questions or anything yourselves, it would be great to share them, and not necessarily just with us, but also, with your fellow donor advisors who are here.